Okay, questions from our audience here? Mr. Eggleston first.
Yeah, talk about those 4 states that you split. Which 4 states?
Yeah, actually, you mentioned the 2 and 2.
I'm not going to have a Perry moment here. I've forgotten the second state.
4, not 3.
Well,
right, yeah.
so in the case of Obama, I take more votes away from Obama in New Mexico and Colorado. I take more votes away from Romney when it comes to North Carolina, and there is one other state, and I can't remember.
But the point is, those are all states that are absolutely on the bubble. I mean, it's not like you take votes away from Obama in Mississippi, which wasn't going to vote for him anyway. These are states, he needs Colorado and New Mexico,
right.
And Romney needs North Carolina. Probably will win it, but he needs North Carolina.
Right.
So you do make a difference in those states.
Well, again,
according to this poll.
Right, 50-50, which is what I maintain.
Okay. Other questions from Governor Johnson? Ma'am.
Me? On a more lighter note, or not, what was it that got you so interested in Ayn Rand? How old were you, and what was the first book that you read of hers?
Well, so it was Atlas Shrugged, and for me, it did not influence my life. What it did for me was just codify what I'd already thought. And my takeaway from Atlas Shrugged was that the biggest contribution that I can make to any human being is to be the best that I can be. That's how I influence other lives.
Mm-hmm. There's where you and Paul Ryan are actually a little bit alike, in that you both are devotees of or fans of Ayn Rand. Right?
I'm absolutely a fan, but I would never describe my life having been influenced by Ayn Rand, but to say that really it just, I believe what's being written.
Opened your eyes a little bit to another way of looking at the world.
Well, or just put into words what maybe I had lacked.
Got it. Sir.
Kind of an interesting segue, because I was going to say I foresee a Gary Johnson Rand Paul ticket in 2016.
Well, I intend.
Having said that, my question is this. I followed your career over the years, and I know you have some experience with debates, and I'm wondering what your opinion might be about whether or not Congressman Ryan is going to tear up Vice President Biden in the presumably upcoming vice presidential debate.
Well, I hope that Jim Gray is actually in that debate.
He is your running mate?
My running mate,
yeah.
And that Jim Gray will actually tear up Ryan and Biden both. So I'm going to stick with that.
Say a word or two about him. I suspect that many fewer people know who he is than know who you are.
Well, so Jim Gray, former Superior Court judge in California, former federal prosecutor, very outspoken regarding the war on drugs. I met him in the year 2000. I found him to be really articulate. Since then, I've been with him maybe on a dozen different occasions.
Yep.
Just very, very impressed by how solid he is, and take very seriously the notion that I might get elected President of the United States, and that the Vice President is somebody who needs to be able to step in and take on that role, and he is more than capable of that.
You're a former Republican, now Libertarian. He is a former Republican or Democrat, now Libertarian?
He was appointed judge in California as a Republican. He has changed his registration long ago to Libertarian and actually ran for the U.S. Senate in California as a Libertarian.
Against whom?
I couldn't even say.
Know.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Sir, in the back.
I just have one question about what a Johnson administration would look like when it comes to healthcare. Is it going to be like the GOP machine where they want to overturn Obamacare? Or is it something where you can work with people to make sure that they have access to healthcare services and still keep costs down?
The use of Obamacare in that question makes me think the questioner may have a point of view. I may be misreading it.
Well,
but what do you think?
I would like to see genuine free market approaches to healthcare, and I would like to point out that healthcare in this country is about as far removed from free market as it possibly could be. So would I have insurance to cover myself for ongoing medical need in a free market approach to healthcare? No, I would have health insurance to cover myself for catastrophic injury and illness, and I would pay as you go in a system that could be very competitive. Government could adopt policies to blow the lid off of supply, to give us alternatives that currently don't exist, and now you're back on wellness as opposed to dealing with the problem, as opposed to making us healthy from the. I say making us healthy, but just adopting preventative health care from day one. There are implications of drinking a big gulp every afternoon, and those implications have to do with diabetes. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. But I would repeal President Obama's health care plan if given the opportunity, because I genuinely believe that it's a torpedo in a sinking ship. But Republicans, just a few years before that, controlled both houses of Congress and the presidency, and they passed a prescription health care benefit that at that time was the largest entitlement ever passed in the history of this country. And we're borrowing money and not paid for, and borrowing money to do that. And that's when why am I a Republican? I mean, that's what I was walking around saying. Why am I a Republican? Look, I have a heart, and I would like to take care of those that are truly in need. I think government perhaps is the only entity able to do that. But I think we've stepped so far over the line that unless we reel this back, unless we get control of this, this is going to implode. This is a system that is going to implode if we don't address spending within our means.
You said something I want to ask you about before we take another question about big gulps. This is the year in which the big gulp has become a focus of some controversy. So Mayor Bloomberg in New York, is banning these drinks of a certain size because he believes that people are killing themselves by.
He wants to do that.
He wants to do that. Now you just talked about the pervasive effect or the pernicious effect of these big gulps and the impact it's having on them. So, but Gary Johnson's political philosophy, I think, would be opposed to Mayor Bloomberg on this.
Yes,
because it's government telling people what they have to do.
Well, let's just first of all, this is a mayor of a city, so this is happening at a local level. Yeah. Let me offer a prediction here. Yeah. Is that if this policy actually takes place, what we're going to see, and they should document it, I think we're going to see a big improvement in health as a result of doing this. I think people are going to become a lot more aware of the ramifications of drinking these sodas. But Mayor Bloomberg, he implements this. He has brought about this awareness nationwide, which I think is just terrific. He leaves office, okay? The new office holder takes place. There are fabulous statistics that say that if you can limit the size of the drink, that people will be more healthy. Right. Well, you know what? Not everybody's complying with this. So how about let's criminalize this activity? People will no longer be able to have a 16-ounce container in one hand and a 16-ounce container in the other hand, or they're going to jail. And I'm not embellishing here. I mean, this is what happens to government policy, and that's government policy gone awry.
So you support his intentions, and you predict that the outcome may be good, but it will be good. But the problem is that it's not, practically speaking, the government's job to preclude or prohibit actions of individuals.
Right, and so Mayor Bloomberg's leadership, his leadership is lending itself to us educating ourselves in a much better way. So that's what leaders should do.
Governor, where's the line on this? Where does it stop? So legalize marijuana. How about cocaine?
Well, let's just understand, I'm in the camp that believes that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related, and that is not to discount the problems with use and abuse. Yeah. So when I was governor of New Mexico, I met with judges in Portland, Oregon. They called for the meeting. I had no idea what the meeting was about. Yeah. What they said was, we are here to support what you're saying. We think that what you're saying is right on, but we want to share with you some stories here that maybe you can pass on to others to better educate themselves about the drug issue. They said that methamphetamine really is the boogeyman drug out there. You do methamphetamine, your behavior is altered. You do bad things. You do things that you can't control. They said methamphetamine is probably the best example we can think of a prohibition drug. It wouldn't exist but for prohibition. It's cheap, it's easy to make, and so the consequences of methamphetamine fall disparagingly on the poor. They said, we're not suggesting the following, but if cocaine were legal, these people would use cocaine instead of methamphetamine,
and then the meth problem goes away
without the negative consequences of behavior. But now imagine a government...
Governor, without those negative consequences.
Well,
Let me go from Breaking Bad back to Wall Street.
You've got to let me finish here. Let me finish with the judges here. Yeah. And that was that we're not advocating that cocaine be legal, but if they use cocaine instead of methamphetamine, there would not be the negative consequences. Now, let me just add that doing cocaine puts holes in your heart. People my age that use cocaine on a regular basis, they're not alive anymore. I mean, Whitney Houston is a great example of someone who uses cocaine their entire lives. They die from a heart attack before they get to 50.
Right, but where's the bright line? I mean, Governor, I hear you, and you're making a perfectly rational argument, but I want to understand, where is the line? What drugs are okay, and what, I mean, and who's going to decide which drugs in this construction?
So back to the debate, back to the discussion that should be taking place in this country. Portugal decriminalized all drugs 10 years ago. They did it because of a heroin epidemic in Portugal. In the last 10 years, they have been able to document a 50% decrease in the use of heroin. That flies in the face of what you think it would be. Imagine if cocaine were legal, but you use cocaine, you may die on your first ingestion of cocaine, because it does happen that people's hearts just kind of poof.
Right, but again, I'm just trying to understand, where would you stop? Would you just stop at marijuana?
Well, first of all, we need as a country to legalize marijuana and recognize that the sky won't fall tomorrow, that actually the world will be a better place tomorrow, that law enforcement will go out and enforce real crime. The court dockets will be cleared to deal with real crime, and prisons emptied. Wow, that would be terrific. We need to start there and recognize that, like I say, the world is actually a better place tomorrow, not a worse place. And then we move on to the discussion of other drugs, and that we first look at the drug problem as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue.
Meaning what? I don't want to stay on that.
So you can carry this forward. Decriminalize drug use. I mean, that's a starter. I advocate legalizing marijuana because I think decriminalization turns its back on half the problem, which is the sale of marijuana. You could apply that same logic to other drugs, but I don't want to get caught up in talking about other drugs when we have an opportunity here to really see something different.
You acknowledge, people like me, nuisances in the media are going to ask you about whether this is a slippery slope.
Well, by slippery slope, what is it that we concern ourselves with? Aren't we concerned with death, disease, crime, and corruption? Zurich, Switzerland, they adopt free heroin program. If you want heroin, you can go in and sign up at a clinic. You get free heroin. You get needles that are clean. You don't die from your heroin use. The chief of police from Zurich comes to Albuquerque for a drug conference. He said, when they came out with this program in Zurich, I could not have been more opposed to this, nor could all my colleagues who were in law enforcement. Death, disease, crime, corruption was going to skyrocket. I am here in Albuquerque to say that Zurich is a much better place to live today. That death, disease, crime, corruption have plummeted as a result of this program, and citizens of Zurich have voted to re-up on this program. This is the debate, this is the discussion that needs to occur in the United States.
Okay. Sir, and then sir. Yes.
Governor, outside of national and commercial interests, do free peoples of this world have any responsibility to peoples of, say, North Korea, Syria, or any of the hundreds of dictatorships out there? And how do those responsibilities manifest themselves either in the short term or in the long term, unilaterally or collectively? What's your opinion on that?
Well, that those issues be addressed diplomatically. That let's throttle up the diplomacy here in a really big way. The notion that the United States has always been the shining beacon on the hill, the country that everyone else wants to emulate. I just firmly believe that our military interventions have had the opposite effect. That we now have hundreds of millions of enemies to this country that, but for those military interventions, would not exist. Free trade. Nixon goes to China. We have free trade. We have trade with China. Is China a military threat? I don't buy it at all. We're doing trade with China. They're buying up. They're using U.S. dollars to buy U.S. treasuries. I reject the notion that they are an enemy because we're trading with them.
Right, but the question, if I'm understanding, was less, do we have a reason to be enemies with those people, as do we have an affirmative responsibility toward any of them? Do we owe them anything? Are we obligated in any way to do anything in a positive sense for them?
That's correct. And I believe that as free people, we have an obligation to see free people elsewhere. And so how do you achieve that in a long term? Not
If you take the position that we shouldn't be sticking our nose in other people's business, broadly stated, do we not have an obligation to help advance the cause of these folks in other places?
So, I guess I reiterate my answer, and maybe I'm still a little blockheaded on the question, but the notion of diplomacy, the notion of setting an example. Yes, we want to see free people be able to associate with one another. But if we're going to do that at a cost of military intervention, we're going to make it less safe or more of an impossibility to interact with free people.
Sir, right there.
It seems that the United Nations has fallen out of this discussion for some reason. That the question comes up if America should be the police when there has been an organization set up that's supposed to be doing this kind of activity. So I guess my question is, where are you stand on the United Nations?
You know, I'm promising to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. So I guess I go back to the notion that the United Nations has to have, or should have, an important role, and that from a diplomatic standpoint. But I would be proposing a 43% reduction in United Nations spending. And let me just get back to the fact that this has got to be mutual sacrifice on all of our parts, or we find ourselves with no United Nations. We find ourselves with no country.
Gentleman right here had a question, I thought. Sir with the mustache right there, back row. And we'll make that the last one.
You made a mention of taxation and regulation on the marijuana. What if we just want to grow it in our backyards and experiment with botany without...
He doesn't mean him. He means the royal we, I'm sure.
Well, this is going to end up to be 50 states and how they implement that. Now, if this were my state and I were able to implement marijuana growth and regulation, I would absolutely allow for you to do just that wherever you wanted to do that. And that, of course, would be pressure on pricing, too, in a good way.
Okay. I think ending on marijuana is fine, right? We can do that. Governor, you've been very candid and generous with your time, and we really appreciate your being here.
Thank you.
Good luck with the campaign.
Well,
Thank you very much.